The following is a presentation of Appalachian State University.
It doesn't get much better than this. Stephen Dubner's successful book, Freakonomics, has been translated into 35 languages. It spawned a follow-up publication, an award-winning blog, a documentary, and a public radio program. It also led this 1984 alumnus to become a regular contributor to ABC News and the NFL Network. His latest accolade? Receiving the Distinguished Alumni Award from Appalachian's Alumni Association. We'll meet this intriguing writer coming up on Appalachian Perspective. Welcome to Appalachian Perspective. My guest today is Freakonomics author Stephen Dubner. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Ken.
It's good to have you back. We've met on this platform before. It's been about 6 years, but it's good to have you home.
Thanks. It's always incredibly fun to come back here. I've only done it, I think, 3 times or 4 times since I was a student here. The pace of change in the last spell, though, is remarkable. So I can't believe how much the university has grown in all good ways, but it's also, you know, like coming back to any home, just wonderfully, you know, all the good memories come flowing back at you. I like how the mind works. The good memories come flowing back. The bad memories somehow disappear, which I'm very happy about.
Well, it's great to have you back. Sometimes we get to catch up. I enjoy the opportunity to just sit down and visit with you, whether it's in New York or whether it's here. The last couple of times have been in New York, so I'm glad to have you home. It's your Appalachian home. Now, you're back for the Alumni Awards event later tonight, and I understand that some friends of yours from college days have joined you.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I was reluctant to invite people back to see me get an award because it felt a little bit self-serving, like, dear, you know, old friend, come see me get a plaque or whatever you're going to give me. So it took me a while to work up the courage to say, you know, to invite him and just say, I'd love to see you, and I don't know how recently you've been in Boone, but you might want to get back. And the response from my old friends was just overwhelming. We're oversubscribed. So not only did everybody we asked to come back come, but they suggested more and more people. So all of a sudden we've got this large contingent of friends and family, a couple professors, a couple of my favorite professors, many of whom hadn't been back in a while, and some of whom I got to catch up with last night, and they all felt the same as I have, which is the changes here in the last several years are remarkable, but that it still feels just like home. So, you know, basically, what I'm trying to say is kudos to you and you know, the university for maintaining that balance of growth with hanging on to all the things about Appalachian that made it special. You know, I grew up in New York State, upstate New York, very rural area. The reason I ended up at Appalachian were 2 reasons. One is the honors program offered me a scholarship, without which I would not have been able to consider coming. And 2 is when I visited campus, when I visited a few places down here, this was the one that spoke to me because it's so beautiful and rural and peaceful and relaxed. You know, I went to UNCG, which I thought was a fine school, but it was far too big a city for me. Greensboro was too urban for me. So that same feeling, you know, still really applies here in Boone, which I'm happy to see.
Well, I hope you know that this Appalachian community that's here, we're very proud of you and the great job that you have done, the recognition. It means a lot to have you among our family members. It's an honor for us.
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, I appreciate
so the young people that have come back with you, do you keep in touch in today's world?
Yeah, so, you know, it's funny. There were a few different circles of friends and acquaintances, like, you know, like anywhere in life. So I had the people that I knew from, you know, school itself. The other people I met in the honors program originally, we lived together in a co-ed freshman honors dorm, and there were a lot of very intense friendships forged then. Then there were some other friends who did, you know, other stuff from the newspaper and things like that where I participated. And then I was in this band when I was here, and frankly, you know, I'll be honest with you, the idea of me being a distinguished alumni, if you had looked at the freshman class of 1980, and tried to find who among them might be a distinguished alumni, I would not have been on the top 100, not even the top 1,000. I was not the model student in any way. primarily because I got involved in this band that was formed with some other fellows here, and that became really our major pursuit. So I went to class, I graduated, and so on, but the band became the center of our existence. And, you know, thinking back and now coming back to visit, what's remarkable to think is how incredibly supportive the university was with the band, even though it was an extracurricular activity. So, you know, we'd practice in the music, in I.G. Greer, you know, in one of the music rooms. One of my favorite professors, Jim Winder, is a history professor who's now retired. He also taught the single most desirable course on campus at the time, which was the history of rock and roll course, which all of us took. Jim Winder, the professor, came to our very first gig that we ever played, which was in the old Student Union. And just knowing that this thing that we're starting up that wasn't directly related to the university, this band, was so embraced by the university community, it was a huge, huge boost to us. It wouldn't have happened had it not been for that.
From upstate New York to Boone, North Carolina, and my understanding from what I read is this happened when you were 16, that you first came to campus.
Yeah.
How did you find Appalachian?
So I'm the youngest of 8 kids. My dad had died when I was a boy, when I was 10, and so it was just me and my mom in this big old farmhouse in upstate New York, in the back of beyond, the middle of nowhere. And we were poor and cranky and ready for a change. And we decided, my mom wanted to sell the house and move somewhere a little bit warmer. And she had some friends who'd moved to Asheville. So we came down to Asheville to visit, and we both really liked it. For reasons that now puzzle me, I decided that it would be a neat thing to go to college near my mom. I mean, that seems like a strange decision in retrospect. But, you know, we were very close, and I think we wanted to help take care of each other. And so we visited some schools down here. And then I accelerated my my high school. I finished 2 years of high school in one to hurry up to get down here. And then, like I said, we visited some schools here, and Appalachian was plainly the one that spoke to me. As it turns out, my mom couldn't sell the house. That was when home mortgage interest rates were about 18% because of a financial situation. She never ended up moving to North Carolina, but I did, and so it was just a great place for me to land. But it was a strange set of circumstances that led me here. There weren't many other New Yorkers here, but I did meet some New York transplants who'd ended up in Greensboro, and they remain, you know, among the closest friends today. Some of the folks will be back for this event tonight.
You mentioned the band. My notes had said it was the Right Profile. Was that the name of the band?
That's the name of the band.
So when you came, were you considering a career in music?
So I think the short answer to that would be no. It's hard to think back at 16. What the heck do you think about? I mean, I think it was day to day, just trying to like grow up and adapt to a new place and fit in and all those things. And but I'd always played music. I'd played in bands all during high school, kind of, you know, regular band, orchestra and stuff. But then, you know, started rock bands. But I was very shy. I mean, I'm still shy. I've learned how to sound like a blabbermouth, but I'm most happy, you know, in a room alone, doing my writing or with my family or whatnot. I would never go out and try to find guys to start a band at a place like Appalachian where there's all these people. But another guy who became my very close friend and bandmate, he had that, you know, wherewithal, and he put up these signs on campus. And I think it said, drummer and guitarist wanted. For a band, we want to write and play our own music, but here are some of the people we like, The Clash and Bruce Springsteen and Buddy Holly. And I read that sign, I was like, oh my God, that's the music I like, you know, kind of old style music, but punk and blah, blah, blah. Too bad I don't play guitar or drums. I play piano, like rock and roll piano is what I grew up playing. And then as it happened, I met this guy a couple days later through mutual friends, found out he was the guy that put up the sign. And I said, oh, you know, I wish you were looking for a piano player because I'd love to be in a band like that. I've been in bands, but I play kind of rock and roll piano. He said, oh, a piano player is what we really do want. Like Bruce Springsteen's band and Roy Bittan plays that great piano that really changes the shape of the rock and roll music sound. But he said, we didn't want to advertise for a piano player because most people who come forward as piano players are the kind that kind of learn to play in their parlor and very sedate music, and we wanted rock and roll. We didn't think we could get it. So I was like, well, if you want a rock and roll piano player, and I am one, we should do it. And again, it was all because of the circumstance of being here together that made it happen.
Well, for a young person who wanted to have sort of a quiet life and not be in the
yeah, I failed.
in the spotlight, you did, but you were really there until, for me, Freakonomics hit the newsstand and the word began to spread. But before that, you wrote a book that was called Turbulent Souls, and you renamed it Choosing My Religion.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. That has a personal side, I understand.
So Turbulent Souls was my first book. It was a memoir, which, you know, I've always, as a writer, I've always been of the opinion that no one should write a memoir until they're at least 60. And here I was, I wrote 2 memoirs before I was probably 35 or so. It wasn't, I didn't set out to write about myself or my own life, but I'd begun a novel. I went to graduate school in New York at Columbia for fiction writing. I got an MFA in fiction writing. And I was working on a novel that was based on my own family, like many novels are, especially first novels. And my parents were this pair of Brooklyn-born Jews who, before they met each other, both converted to Catholicism in New York, and very unusual. And I grew up as the 8th and last child of a big Catholic family in upstate New York, knowing a little bit about my parents, having been Jewish and converted. They weren't at all anti-Semitic. They didn't hide the fact that they'd been Jewish, but they'd become such devout Catholics that they considered their Judaism sort of ancient history. And so by the time I was born, they'd been Catholic for a quarter of a century. By the time I was an adult, it was ancient history. But I began to get curious about my parents. I mentioned my dad had died when I was a kid. You know, writers, you're always thinking about who you are, where you come from, and so on. So I began to write that book as a novel. And then I realized I didn't have enough information. And I'd been a journalist. I'd grown up as a journalist. So I thought, well, I'll pursue the nonfiction part. And I began to interview my mother. But my father was this big black box, this mystery. So I had to go track down my father's family. These people who were my blood relatives who I'd never met. I didn't even know about them. And it became this long search for family and then ultimately religion. And I returned to Judaism in the long run. And so that was the first book. It was a book I'm still really proud of. I think it's, I think it's a pretty good book. It does seem like a lifetime away because Freakonomics then came a couple books later and kind of swamped everything. Yes. And I'll be honest with you, I as much as I loved writing the kind of smaller personal memoir stuff, writing Freakonomics and this kind of stuff, nonfiction that's informed by creative thinking is the way I think of it. That's what I love. I love journalism, but I also love creative nonfiction writing. I love coming up with ideas and then illustrating them, not just chasing the police car or whatnot. And to me, that's what I was born to do. I love to observe the way things work. I love to ask questions. My job is phenomenally fun. I get to track down and ask questions of the most brilliant, interesting people in the world. And I write down what they say, and then people read it, and they know a little bit more about the way the world works. That's awesome,
Did you, as a visionary, which you are, you certainly make everyone think when they read your writings, but as a visionary, did you ever see this amount of success coming from your writings?
No. No, everything. I mean, writers, we have a phrase, whenever you've written something and it's about to be published, we call it the lull before the lull. There's a lot of quiet, and then something gets published, and there's still a lot of quiet. There's so much writing published in so many formats. Most of it doesn't get read very widely. So unless you're a delusionist or a narcissist, the smart money is on thinking that you're lucky if you get read a little bit. So Freakonomics was a big accident, which I'm very, very grateful for and happy about. The irony then not quite the irony, the paradox becomes then that the accident that happens, it gives you an audience and it gives you a voice. Then it's real. So once you have your audience, you really do have them. So it's nice that the success of that book was able to provide a continuing platform for us to do other books and a radio show and things like that.
The radio show you just referred to, you're going to be doing that show, I think, across the hall here on campus in just a few minutes. It's a call-in with questions?
No, It's what you call a produced show. So it's a lot like a book.
Okay.
You interview lots and lots and lots of people. You do lots and lots and lots of research. And then you boil it all down into, in the case of our radio show, a 20 or 30 or 60 minute produced piece. For every hour of radio you hear, there's probably been about 30, 40, 50 hours worth of work put into it, because it's not meant to be just casual chat about a topic. It's meant to be kind of thoughtful, empirical based. So what I'm doing today, we're doing an hour-long episode on college and the value of college, which is a very big and important and controversial topic. Universities have gotten much more expensive in the past 20 years. Where's the money go, and how is it worth it as an investment if you're a parent or a kid? The numbers that economists look at say that, yes, the investment is very much, there's probably never been a higher rate of return on education as there is today in our society, because as society's gotten more technological, more complex, the rewards are ever greater for those with more knowledge, more technology, more understanding of the way the world works. That said, the part of the question we wanted to ask and answer in this episode is, how does that value in a person like me or you or any student, how is that value created? Is it just the numbers and facts and figures that you learn? Or is it intangibles? Is it learning how to think differently as you're a student? So what we're doing today here at Appalachian, at the radio station where I used to work as a DJ a million years ago, is I'm interviewing 3 of my old favorite professors, each of whom taught me a lesson of some kind that changed the way that that helped make the creative person that I am. They basically taught me a kind of life lesson within the context of the academic environment that I was able to, really assimilate and turn into the way I think about things. So it'll be hopefully a good conversation with these 3 professors about these things that they taught me and what they see as what economists would call the transfer of knowledge, a very unromantic phrase for what happens to young people at university.
I believe I heard you correctly at the beginning when you said the value of higher education is greater now than it has ever been.
Yeah.
That's something I love to hear.
I bet you do.
And we have, sometimes we hear of the opposite, that you're not doing what you used to do, or it's, there are criticisms of what goes on in higher education. So we had lots of challenges. Do you see from all of your research challenges that we're facing in higher education?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, without question. I mean, cost is a real issue. The inflation of college tuition has outpaced the inflation rate of just about anything I could find except for gold in the last 30 years or so. And honestly, gold had dipped historically. So really, if you look at it over 100 years, college tuition may have inflated more than the rest. You have to ask you have to ask 2 things. Is it worth it? And what are you getting for it? So when you start to look at the dollars and where the dollars go, you see a lot of really interesting things. First of all, if you're a state university, but even if you're not, you see that funding, state and federal funding, has really, really diminished. Those costs have, so when you pass a state budget and you're going to give $100 million less to your university system, that money doesn't magically come from somewhere. So that's one part of it. You could argue that, it's good for students and their families to invest more themselves in paying for the professors and the physical, parts of the campus. It changes the way you feel about it. The other thing I would say is that there is a lot of confusion, I think, about the value of the education. So, we're living at hopefully the end of a really bad recession, really bad. That said, we didn't go into depression. That said, our society has continued to function pretty darn well. That said, a lot of things in society have continued to get better. Life expectancy, crime rate continues to lower. A lot of things are going incredibly well in our society right now. We tend to lose sight of that and focus on the problems. We focus on this horribly partisan, interlocked, gridlocked governmental system we've got in the states and the federal government. We focus on things like college. And you see a lot of young people get out of college now with debt and job prospects not as good as they would have been 5 years ago, which leads people to the very kind of facile conclusion of, oh, well, college isn't worth it. Yeah, but then you look at the rate of employment and the salary and the lifetime salary of a college graduate today in a bad job climate versus a non-college graduate, you do not want to be the non-college graduate. So as much as the college graduate may have taken a hit relative to 5 years ago, the value of education has actually increased, the gap between the educated and the uneducated. I think what this argues for is making as much education, and as many types of education, I should say, from vocational to the purely intellectual, making as much education and as many types of education as accessible to as many people in society as possible. Economists have a phrase, it's called externalities. An externality is a cost or a benefit that you get for something that you don't do. So a negative externality would be like pollution. Let's say I have a big factory and I pollute the air and you live downstream from it. You can't do anything about it, but you pay the price. That's a negative externality. It's easy to think of those examples, unfortunately. There are also, however, positive externalities. Education is maybe the strongest positive externality that's ever existed. The more people that get the more education, the more positive things that happen for all of society. So societies that have more education tend to be safer. They tend to have better environments. They tend to have better longevity and health generally. So I think it's easy to lose sight of the big picture when you get upset about pieces of it. And the big picture is that education is a good, it's a service that provides an unbelievably good value for society. And while there are complications and conflicts and controversy and cost has gotten to be a significant barrier, you can't lose sight of that fact.
Right, right. What do you see, you mentioned economics, what do you see as the problem with our economy today? I mean, one day I hear it's good, one day I hear it's not good, back and forth, and some of it might just be partisan politics. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, what do you see from where you are?
It's hard to say. It's a hard question, and people much smarter than I, trained economists, will give you line up 10 economists and you'll get about 11 opinions. You'll get 11 answers to that very question, which makes me want to ask a different kind of question. I realized this when I began to look at some of the best and brightest economists in the world today, including Ben Bernanke, are still arguing over whether FDR's monetary and fiscal interventions during the Depression exacerbated the Depression or helped end it. Literally, that's the argument that's still happening in academia today to some degree. If they can't figure out what happened 80, 90 years ago, I tend to distrust a lot of the macroeconomic explanations and projections and predictions about the future. Should we have tripled the stimulus? Would that have fixed everything? Some say yes, and some say absolutely not. It would give us a debt that we'd never get out of. In terms of what our economy is today and what's wrong with it, I would say that it became overheated on a number of dimensions, none of which are non-obvious. In other words, a lot of which in retrospect were really obvious. The housing bubble, and there were plenty of people who said this and saw it as it was happening. There were a lot of bad things happening at once there. There was a lot of inefficiency. There were a lot of people getting rewards without taking risks. There was inflation. It was a bubble. A commodity typically doesn't triple in price in 5 years unless there's a very robust set of people wanting to buy that thing. And it's not like we were importing hundreds of millions of people to buy all these new homes. So a lot of things have happened in that cycle that weren't good. We're adjusting to it. We're also adjusting to a world in which we're learning to live with the trade-offs of technology. So technology produces unbelievable gains to society, generally. It also, however, tends to increase productivity a lot. And that means it changes your employment. So every time that I invent a thing that does the work of 1 or 2 or 3 or 100 people, that changes the employment picture. There's an economist named Joseph Schumpeter who had a phrase describing capitalism. He called it creative destruction. It's an anomaly. How can something destructive be creative? It's the old, you have to break eggs to make an omelet. That's what the economy is. And there will always be, I hate to say it, winners and losers. If your economy is robust enough, however, the people who lose out on one dimension will have other opportunities. But again, education is often the key component to having those opportunities.
You know, in all of your writings, as you said, Freakonomics really just, you know, that elevated you and put your name up whether you want it up or not. It just made it happen. But then shortly after that comes Super Economics, Freakonomics. The first chapter in that book is just an intriguing chapter, an intriguing topic to me. And I just wonder, how do you come up with these topics to say, this is something I want to research? It's how is a street prostitute like a department store Santa? Where does that come from?
All right, so the actual question is, believe it or not, that actual question is about the labor supply. In other words, you know, we write about a lot of topics that most people leave well enough alone because they look at a topic like drug sales or prostitution. They think I'm morally opposed to those, and therefore I don't want to know anything about it. I don't have that attitude. I'm not an immoral person at all. I consider myself a deeply moral person, as I assume everyone does. But I do think that for the work that I do with my co-author Steve Levitt, it helps to be amoral, which means to turn off your moral view of the world. Because we all have a moral view. And we all have a moral compass. But I think, personally, the best way to solve a problem is to put your moral compass in your pocket first and use your rational, intellectual brain and try to figure out what's actually happening here. Instead of saying prostitution is a horrible thing and therefore I don't want to learn a thing about it, you could say, look, I may feel X or Y about prostitution. What I know is it exists. And because it exists, it's a real thing in our society. There are women who go into it. There are men who pay for it. So how does that work? What's the economics of it? What kind of woman does it and why? Why is it so attractive? Why does it pay so much? Why does it pay enough so that people will do it? A department store Santa, it turns out, they are a little bit like prostitutes in that they respond to short-term demand surges. You know, a department store Santa, you can only work a few weeks out of the year. Turns out there are markets where prostitution burgeons a few weeks a year. London right now is very concerned that the Olympics there will give rise to a big spike in prostitution. It's supply and demand. So how we come up with this stuff is my partner and I were a little bit peas in a pod. He's much smarter than I am, and he's an economist who works with very complicated, elegant math. My math is maybe slightly above average, but we both love to look around the world and find the things that truly interest us, and then pursue them as deeply as we can and write about them. I think if I had any advice for students generally, is really like, you know, you really, I know it's a cliche, but you really have to try to find something that you love to do. Because it's hard to get really good at something if you don't love it. Because the way you get good at something is by doing, whether it's, you know, writing or playing music or playing golf or whatever. And if you don't love it, you're not going to want to do it as much. Then you're not going to get as good as you want to get. So I think that the value of finding something that truly turns you on just really can't be overstated. Look, that's what's another good thing about college. It's a place to try anything and everything. Try to learn whatever you want to learn to see what really works for you.
How would you deal with the situations that I think all of us face on university campuses now? Like you say, you may not like it and you'll say it's wrong, I don't support this at all. But if you really face the brutal facts, you have to realize that there's abuse of alcohol and there's the use of drugs, illegal drugs on campuses. It's there.
Yeah.
How do we stop that?
Well, so if that were an easy question, you know, it's funny. My first rule of problem solving is to kind of figure out what the problem you're actually trying to solve is. And often you feel like often you come up with the fact that you're addressing a symptom and not a root cause. And so you need to change your attention to the root cause. The other thing is, if problems were easy to solve, they wouldn't still be around. I mean, if this problem, if I could tell you how to solve this problem, we wouldn't be having the conversation. I think with something like drugs and alcohol, I think to me, and this is something we've been thinking about, just starting to do some research on, you do want to look at the root cause. Why do people do, you know, everybody uses drugs to some degree. I'm drinking some coffee right here, that's a drug, right? There are many different, it's a huge spectrum. What are people trying to accomplish when they do it? Are they trying to make themselves feel better about themselves? Are they trying to fit in better with other people? Are they trying to become someone that they're not? Are they unhappy with themselves? I think the single best starting point is to look at data.
Thank you very much for being a guest on Appalachian Perspective. It's great to have you back on campus. We're all very proud of you. We want you to keep coming back, and we'll keep visiting you in New York. But thank you for being a guest on Appalachian Perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.